So welcome. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, all 7 of us. I'll start by lighting the peace candle. Time of silence. The Spirit of the Lord is upon us, because they have anointed us to proclaim victory for the poor. They have sent us to freedom to prisoners, recovery of sight to the blind, to set free those who are oppressed, to proclaim the year of Jubilee and grace from the Lord. Today we fulfill this scripture. Let's sing the Journey 121 for opening worship. Okay, let's read this together. God of love,
light a flame in our hearts to you, a flame of love to our families and friends, a flame of love to our neighbors, a flame of love to our enemies. Light a flame of love in our hearts to all, from the lowliest thing that lives to the name that is highest of all. Amen.
Outside.
Three-part harmony.
Very low melody line. Does that work?
I kind of anticipate this group, since I saw the list. We'll try some regular, but I was looking for sort of a theme of comfort and assurance. So 589. Somebody's, well, I'll sing melody and somebody else.
No, you can sing tenor. I'll try melody, but
My shadow has been so far my need, Jehovah is his name. In pasture fresh, he makes me feed beside the 136 is written in 3 parts. So our old reliable 3-parter. That's actually 2 parts, but you can make up a third if you want.
Yeah, males on soprano,
Yes.
females on alto. Sounds good.
Where do you breathe in that song?
Yeah, it's hard. It goes on
After
and on.
sadness. At the end of each line, actually. But there's a long line. 383.
What do you think?
383. Start accompanying. some of the alto lines it's the most boring. Unfortunately. 372. I think this was the first song we sang after gathering back after the COVID break. I don't think we've sung it since. But it's antiphonally, so I'll sing and then you echo it. Oh, healing river, oh, healing river, send down your water, send down your water, send down your water, send down your water upon this land, oh, healing river, send down your water, send down your water, wash the blood, wash the blood from all the sand. This land is parching, this land is burning, no seed is growing, no seed is growing in the barren ground, oh, healing river, send down your water, oh, healing river, oh, healing river, send water down, let the seed of freedom awake and flourish, let the deep roots nourish, all stops right, let the tall stops right, oh, healing river, send down your water, oh, healing river, from out of the skies. All right, you got it.
Thank you, Galen.
Jerry can't read scripture this morning, so the scripture is Acts 6, 1-4. In those days when the number of disciples was increasing, the Grecian Jews among them complained against the Hebraic Jews because their widows were being overlooked in the daily distribution of food. So the 12 gathered all the disciples together and said, "It would not be right for us to neglect the ministry of the Word of God in order to wait on tables. Brothers, choose 7 men from among you who are known to be full of the Spirit and wisdom. We will turn this responsibility over to them and will give our attention to prayer and the ministry of the Word."
All right, so today I'm going to tell kind of a longer personal story. Oh, let's get this mask off. Ah, hi. So, when Facebook popped up, I began to meet a number of people who called themselves homeless advocates, although in reality, they were really more participants in mutual aid. That's what they really were. And perhaps it was better to call them relief workers for houseless folks, basically keeping houseless folk alive. That was mostly what we were doing. But they did advocate, and it was great. But the thing is, the most important thing for me is like, oh, I found my tribe. I found my people who are doing the same things that I'm doing in one part of Portland, and they're working in other parts of Portland. And there were parts of Portland that were missing, and some of us went over there and did stuff there. And but we were all basically interested in the same thing. And I met atheists and pagans and Christians and Buddhists who all had the same struggle and love for the oppressed in our city. And a lot of these folks are still working in Portland. And so now, a lot of these folks had the habit of calling the houseless folks that they met friends. They said, this is our friends, these are our friends. And I kind of like that. I feel like that's very friendly. Friends is friendly. And you know, and what else are you going to say? You know, we're not social workers, so we don't call them clients, which is very cold and distant anyway. And we also recognize that houseless folks have equality to us. You know, they're not less than us. We don't look down on them. But friends never really felt comfortable for me, just like calling people who we meet on Facebook friends, just because we both recognize that we want a connection on Facebook does not make us friends. There are plenty of people that we don't know at all, and yet we are, quote, friends on Facebook. And now I have to clarify, oh, that person's my friend whom I've never met. No, I never, anyway. And it's kind of the way it is a lot of times if you're going to call every houseless person that you meet or attends your meal or whatever your friend. Just because you give somebody a meal doesn't make them your friend. I've never really understood that. But we are community members together, and so I like community members, but that's long and all of that. Anyway, but the biggest problem I had was that if we're going to call folks on the street friends, then why don't more of us have our friends in our house? If we had a friend and they are struggling and they are having a hard time or they lost their job, and a lot of times we say, oh, come and stay with us. Now, that doesn't mean everybody would, or it doesn't mean that everybody would in every circumstance, but a lot of times we would say, hey, you come and stay with us until you get back on your feet. And yet I find that for most homeless advocates, that almost never happens. Maybe about a third of them do. Sometimes we'll have people come and stay with them. And that was always hard. Now for us, when we started working with houseless folk, it was always my intention to have people live with us. And I always have to clarify that having people live in our house was never my idea. It's all Diane's. Diane did it. She's the one who first wanted somebody to come in our house when we were married for less than 3 weeks. And he stayed for 5 years. Oh, that's a lie. It wasn't 5 years. It was 2 or 3 weeks. Anyway, it felt like 5 years. It took a little while before I was ready to have people come and stay with us, but Diane was ready. She was there. And so everything that I'm saying after this, is basically her fault. Okay, so when we started working with houseless people, it was my intention to have people stay with us, but it was difficult. I mean, we were raising, at the beginning, 2 kids in a 2-bedroom apartment. So it's 4 of us, 2-bedroom apartment. That is a full apartment. But we regularly made it fuller. When we were in an apartment, we didn't so much have people stay with us long term. It was always supposed to be a temporary place for people who were kind of moving on from one thing to another. Sometimes it was longer than we intended, but you know, there was a number of people. There was one woman who had left New York with her son. She was looking for a place to hide from her ex. There was a friend who, an actual friend, a house's friend, who was an alcoholic, but his leg was broken, and he had to stay with us. Broken, sprained? Anyway, Steve, you remember?
You're talking about leprechaun?
Yes, leprechaun.
Yeah, he was run over. It was like mangled.
Yeah,
It
no,
was
he was.
mangled badly.
Yeah, it was.
It wasn't just broken.
Because he got run into by a car, and so he stayed with us on our couch for months. We had a couple who were looking for a temporary spot, and they stayed in our living room, and they caused much drama. But that's a story for another day. And then we had Brian, who was a good friend on the street, and he stayed with us. He was kind of looking for discipleship, and he stayed with us for a long time. And then came the exciting weekend when the apartment building that we lived in was sold. And the new owner came to me with a 30-day notice saying, your work and my work, they don't go together. And so we were kicked out because we helped homeless folks. And at the time that we moved in, rent was reasonable. And at this time, rent was not reasonable anymore. You couldn't find anymore a 2-bedroom apartment for $550. And nowadays you can't really, you can barely find that for twice that much. And so at the beginning of that weekend when I received that notice, I called 2 people and said, I need you to pray because we have no idea what we're going to do. We have no deposit. We don't have money to pay higher rent. And we just don't know what to do. I called our conference minister, our Mennonite conference minister, and I called my father. Just said, please, you guys pray. We don't know what we're going to do. 2 days later, my father calls me and says, we're going to pay for a house. Choose a house and we'll buy it for you and you can move in. And so we chose a house, and that's a story in and of itself, and someday I will tell that story. But we ended up choosing a house not far from downtown Portland that had 6 bedrooms. And that allowed us to invite more people to come and stay with us. And so we were able to have our family of 5, because now there were 5 of us, family of 5 move in, and then we can have other folks stay with us as well. And so we invited people whom we knew. We didn't invite complete strangers. We never invited, I shouldn't say never, almost never invited complete strangers to stay with us. But we would invite people that we knew and people who needed some time to get back on their feet, to figure out what they were going to do for their next step. So we moved in and we invited 3 or 4 people to come in. And later on we would have as many beside our family of 5, we would have a variety of people. At one point we had as many as 11 people beside our family staying with us. And that was crazy. And it was hard work. And we were doing other things as well, you know. But we felt it was worth it. It was worth it to show love and belonging to people. So one of the folks who stayed with us, his name is Tim. And Tim found himself on the street in Gresham because of a housing mix-up. He found friends on the street who were helping him and helping figure it out, and they kept inviting him to drink. And he said, this is what you need to do. This is what you need to do to numb the shame. And they kept inviting him to drink. And he said he didn't need that. Oh, don't need that. I'm fine. You know, he was a mellow individual. He didn't care what other people thought. And then one day he was at the park with some of his friends, and he saw his sister and her kids come into the park, and they were playing on the swings. And he said, oh, great. So he goes over to talk to her. And she glances up at him, grabs her kids off the swing, and runs to their car and drives away. And then Tim turns around back to his friends, and he looked at one of his friends who had a full 40-ounce beer and said, "Give me that." And he took it and drank the whole thing in one shot. And he was a drunk from that point on. And he was still the kindest person I think I've ever met. Possibly. He certainly is in the top 3. He never had any kind of disparaging sentence for anyone. Even the people who abused him and hit him, he never said anything back to them. And also, he was one of those people who would pretty regularly see his doctors, and his high blood pressure was so high, he would go to the doctors, and the doctors would wonder how it is that he's still alive. I mean, just insanely high. I've never heard numbers like that. So I approached him one day and said, "Hey, well, we've got a space in our house. Would you come? Would you come and stay with our house?" And his friend said, "Please, Tim, please go to their house," because they didn't want to see him die. And every time he went to the doctor, it was another reminder that he could die any minute. And they didn't want to see him die. And his friend Tink, especially, just begged him. She was like his granddaughter. And she begged him, "Please, go to the house." And he thought about it, and eventually he figured that he could give up the drinking because the drinking wasn't that big of a deal to him. So he just gave it up and came and stayed with us. And he stayed with us for a few years. And he would come out with us every week and connect with his friends in Gresham, and he would come back out with us, and he would rest, and he would read, and he would go to the doctor, and he would basically be able to have a life of peace for a few years until he passed away, basically in our dining room. And you think, wow, that must have been horrible. And it wasn't. Because we got to give him a few years of really good peace, of where he finally got to feel belonging, and he finally got to feel welcomed, that he didn't get from his family, that he didn't get from other folks, he didn't get from his friends who on the street who kept abusing him. And he died relatively peacefully. It was very quick, and that was fine. We wanted to love. And providing housing to houseless people, that seems like a no-brainer. There's a lot of people that don't do it. It's funny, but to us, that was just a no-brainer. And so few people were doing it. And obviously, not everybody could take 11 people in their house at one time. In fact, I really don't recommend it. Having been there, don't recommend that step. And I understand also that there's a lot of families that have like kids with special needs, let's say, and you don't want to bring houseless people into a family that have, kids who have problems, or other people that have issues, or necessarily people who are disabled. You wouldn't necessarily want to do that. And so we'll do that. And then we found out that we were the family that had kids with special needs. And so we homeschooled all of our kids, at least through the elementary years. And so we knew that there was something going on, but we figured it was kind of an educational problem, either ADHD or ADD or dyslexia. Certainly there was dyslexia. And so we figured, well, it's just something like that. And it's just stuff we've got to work through, and it's fine. And eventually, my oldest daughter went to a counselor, and the counselor said, well, have you ever taken a test for Asperger's? And we went home, there's all these tests online, and it turned out that she's on she has autism spectrum disorder, ASD. And it turned out that my oldest son also has ASD, and we found out that actually ASD is passed through the male gene. It's only passed through the male gene. So we started looking at our broader family, and my niece and my nephew, they both have ASD. And my father probably has ASD. I almost certainly have ASD. And my other daughter almost certainly does as well. Only a few of those people have actually been officially diagnosed, taken all the proper tests and been officially diagnosed. If you want to be diagnosed as an adult for ASD, it costs around $10,000 because you have to be diagnosed by a panel of psychiatrists. So you can't. It's not just a quick little thing. There's this long test that you have to go through, and my two older kids basically didn't go through exactly that system, but close enough so that way they got diagnosed. All the rest of us weren't able to do that. So the question that I asked myself, and I'm not asking you because my story is pretty personal, and I'm not asking you I'm not inviting you to come in and tell me how I should live my life. But did I make a mistake? Did we make a mistake inviting all these people in? No, I'll say most of these people I invited in. Most of these people Diane did not. It's still her fault, but she's not the one who invited most of these people in. Okay. And so did we make a mistake? Should we have kept the work with the homeless and our family separate? Should that just be a rule for everyone? If everybody's got a family with kids, maybe they should not bring their kids in with their work with houses. We always brought our kids in. We brought them to church. We had them hang out with houses people all the time. And we were thinking, children can learn a lot through ministry and daily interaction, and can get used to a population who are segregated and even hated in our society. But what about people who have special needs? What about people who have autism and so have actually problems processing socially? And putting them into a house situation where there's a crowd of people all around them 24 hours a day. Is that the right thing to do? So last week we talked about basic human needs, things that we all need and we share in common. So if the person is in need of shelter and warmth, we know what that's like. We know what that feels like. Because sometimes we feel it ourselves. We need more warmth and all that. And when we feel that, a lot of times we think, wow, what about all those people that don't have this? When a person needs belonging, when they need a place where they're welcome and fit in, we also know what that feels like. We've been in situations where we feel outside of everyone and nobody is welcoming us. Most of us, though, we've got people who will accept us even when maybe there were times that the church didn't. Some of us have got family that we can depend on. Some of us have got friends that we can depend on. We've got somebody we can connect. But I will tell you, if a person is chronically homeless, the one common thread that is between all of them is not drug addiction or mental illness. It is that they don't have family or friends who are going to support them in their time of need. That's the common element. That's actually what makes people homeless, is that they don't belong. They don't have a network of community. And now, imagine that the very city that you live in and you exist in every day lets you know every single day that you are not welcome. Sometimes people will call the police on you. Sometimes people will go up to you and say, would you get out of my city? Sometimes people will say, get a job. But you've already tried to get a job, and you go to the people who are interviewing you, and they say, well, we're not going to accept somebody who can't have a shower every day or who doesn't have an address. Every day there's something, maybe sometimes even little, to remind you that you don't belong. And so, isn't it like the best thing in the world to have somebody say, you are welcome here. I want you to have a safe place. I want you to have a room to yourself, a bed where you can lay on, and a place to keep your stuff safe. You are welcome. You belong here. And this is what we felt like it was really simple for us to do. It was a very simple thing for us to do. However, my children also needed the same thing. They needed a place that they can feel like they belong. That they, even though they were struggling socially, that they could belong as well. That they could fit in and feel like they had their space and they had their bed and they can be safe and comfortable as well. Sometimes I think about the difference between Jesus and Abraham. This fits somewhere. I'll get there. I think about the difference between, so Abraham is one of those guys who would welcome people and make them belong. The way that he did it is he basically sat by the side of the road, and when travelers would go by, he would welcome them in and give them a really good meal. Probably he would give them a place to crash for the night as well. But Abraham's focus was actually on his family. Was on his family and on the people who worked for him. He had his own community of people who already belonged, and they were not made up of people who were walking by the side of the road. He had his family, he focused on his family, and then he invited people over, and that was his focus. Now, Jesus kind of did the exact opposite of Abraham. He still wanted to give people welcome, but his focus on welcoming was on the whole world. He wanted to welcome the whole world. He sat with sinners and welcomed them, and he worked with crowds all day from early in the morning till late at night, and he worked with as many people, giving them forgiveness and welcome and community all day long. But in order to do that, he had to leave his family. He had to leave them behind. And he had to focus instead on the world, because there are people in the world, every single society, who are not welcome anywhere, and there are a lot of times we have family members that need also our focus. So how do we do that? How do we balance it? And the only thing I have figured out scripturally is that there is not one answer. There's no easy way to just say, oh, well, this is how you need to do it. A lot of people will tell you, well, scripturally, you need to focus on your family. Somebody said that, focus on your family. You need to do that, and you need to focus on your family, and then the world will take care of itself. But that isn't what Jesus did. Jesus said, actually, I need to forget my family so that way we can create space for the whole world. And nobody is out there saying, you know, Jesus, you made the wrong choice. Now, for me, when I think about love, I think about it in a different way than most people. A lot of people think about love, and they think about affection, they think about kindness, they think about a feeling of connecting between people. And I don't think about love that way. Maybe it's my ASD, I am not sure, but I don't feel love very much. I see it. I don't believe it unless I see it, because I don't feel it. And so so I think about seeing it, and I make plans in order to love. And I honestly, and Diane will tell you that it's true, I think about love as a series of experiments. She sighs. Think about love as a series of experiments that we do to see what will work and what won't work. And once again, I'm not recommending this to most people. This is just how my brain works. And so when we invited all those people into our house, it was an experiment. It was a trial. Inviting one person into our house is also an experiment, but inviting a whole bunch of people, that was an experiment. Going out and having a bunch of meal and having showers, that's an experiment. And we would try these things, and sometimes we would say, well, it works, but it needs to be tweaked. And sometimes we would say, well, that experiment was a failure. And I'm not really sure, and so we keep trying different things. We try a full-time shelter for the winter, where we set up, where we allow people to set up tents and we work with the city, or we have only an emergency shelter, or we did all kinds of things. I could tell you literally hundreds of things that we did to experiment, and some of them worked and some of them didn't. And some of them failed so miserably that we had to shut down everything else that we did. Because that's how I work. And that's what they were doing in Acts chapter 6. In Acts chapter 6, the apostles set up an experiment. They said, look, it's simple, it's easy. We got these people who are donating to the church, and we're going to take that money and we're going to have meals. That's going to go toward widows and orphans. Easy, no problem. Except that in Acts chapter 6, we see that there was a problem. The problem is that the apostles only knew part of the congregation. They only knew some of the people. And there were a whole bunch of widows out there that weren't being fed, weren't getting their needs met, because the apostles didn't know them. Because they were of a different ethnicity. And so the apostles said, oh, well, we screwed this one up. How about if we give it to somebody else? And so they found a bunch of people to be waiters. Literally. It says waiting tables. They were the first deacons. Everybody hears that's because the word deacon actually means a waiter. A person who waits at tables. They were spiritual waiters. And so Stephen and Philip and the others were people who were spiritual people who fed people. That's what they did. And the apostles knew that they had done this experiment and they needed to try it again. They needed to try this again, and they said, this time, we're going to leave ourselves out of the mix. We're going to give it to somebody else to do it, because we think that probably we're not the right people for this. And they were right, and that experiment worked for a while, until it was realized that actually having a whole bunch of men do this work wasn't necessarily the best way to do it, because actually women do the job a lot better, but that's later on in history. A lot later on in history. I believe, once again, this is my personal belief, that love is a process of attempting, failing, trying again, and sometimes succeeding. That we keep trying different things. Love is always a risk. If we weren't willing to take a risk, then none of us would have ever gotten married. Love is a risk. Every single time, love is a risk. Love means that you're going to be vulnerable. And you are possibly making yourself or your family or a whole bunch of other people vulnerable. That's the risk. And that's how come a lot of times we don't want to do love, because we don't want to be vulnerable and we don't want to be exposed, or we certainly don't want to expose our family. But if we don't do that kind of exposure, then how much love can we actually do? We can love, but maybe it'll be a limited love. I don't know. I really wish before we started that my kids had autism. I really wish before we started that I'm ASD. I really wish that we would have known that. And I think that we would have done things differently. But that doesn't mean that we wouldn't have taken risks. It doesn't mean that we wouldn't have loved in an extraordinary way, at least made the attempt. And it doesn't mean that we wouldn't have failed magnificently. That's what I tell myself. But we learned things. We learned after my kids had ASD, oh, maybe my kids need a time with some security and some time by themselves, so that way they can grow without the constant interaction with other people. Maybe everything that we had going on in the house was way too overwhelming for Diane. And maybe I should give her a time so that way she can call the shots. And she doesn't have to worry that I'm going to be bringing somebody over and trying to convince her to let that person stay with us. So I would have done things differently, probably. But I'm also, and Diane will probably have a different story than this, but I'm glad that we did things the way that we did. We learned a lot. We endured a lot. We had a lot of joy. And I'm just glad that we took the risk, because if we hadn't have taken the risk, if we hadn't taken the risk to love big, then there'd be people who I don't know what they would have done. And we would be different people now too. That's all I have to say.
So, sharing time.
First, thanks Steve for the sermon and the reflection on love, and particularly like the connection to risk, and not always, think about the decisions we make as parents, which are different than when we're by ourselves. And like, I was single till I was 37, so the contrast between some of the decisions I could make when I was single till when I was married and had children. And so I always wonder, how do you keep integrity in that? A lot going on in my family. Taste back to college, taking a little bit of risk, right? Going back to EMU on Thursday. He has worked very hard this summer, taking 3 classes from the Lord. Finishes that tonight, so we'll have a few days of non-academic stress before it comes out. So Haley successfully moved to Columbus, and she begins either this week or next grad school. And so that's good. Had a long Zoom with my whole family yesterday. My mom is in care facility right now, where she in Belgium at Greencroft. So the next question will be where she goes next. She's not going to be, it's very, very unlikely she'll return to independent living. So there's different choices about where she'll go and what kind of care she'll get. And all of this is a moving target, because depends on how well she recovers and all of this. And so it's a difficult time to know what's right for her, and I feel, since it's not really viable for me to fly back there, and thought about, well, what would I do if I got back there with so many limitations. Three of my sisters have been able to visit. One of my sisters lives there. There's unnecessary proportion of all of this falls on her, and so we're trying to find ways of supporting my sister as well as my mom. So again, like a situation like what's the right thing to do? I feel very, very thankful for having a family, 6 siblings who all get along and we love each other, and there's just not a lot
I hope you recorded that one because that was really good. I'd like to share that with a friend or two of mine. I feel like the question you're asking is something that's been asked since the beginning of the Catholic Worker Movement. And Dorothy Day did something very similar to what you just described, and many people even today call her a bad mother, and I don't necessarily think that's true, but there's also a Catholic worker in California who comes from a much more wealthy background, he buys houses for people who want to be Catholic workers, and he has this thing about him how he doesn't want any kids raised in the Catholic worker. They have to have their own separate house, so he buys them 2 houses if they have kids. So I don't know, yeah, it's something I think everybody struggles with, and maybe your background determines your stance on it. But yeah, I appreciated you sharing that story. It was really powerful. And then yesterday I was at the river by the footbridge to Watson. There's like that kind of a platform you would sit and put your water in your feet in the water. And a boat came by. It was a hollow kayak. It was taking on water as this guy and his daughter, and Al and I had to jump in and get this girl out of the water and try to keep this boat from getting away from this guy. And it took he was lucky there was a bunch of people that were there, because it took 4 people to grab his boat and pull it out of the water because it was all waterlogged. And so I just wanted to just be thankful that no one got hurt, and that there was people there to help them out, because that could have been really bad. That's all. Thanks.
And I hope they both had life vests on.
No, maybe they both did. I think they both did.
Yeah.
I don't even remember. It happened really fast.
Last Sunday, I wasn't here because I was kayaking with the city of Eugene sponsored trip. We all drove separately to Foster Reservoir up near Detroit, or where is that? No, near Sweet Home, I guess. And they provided the kayaks and stuff. And there were so many people there with pickup trucks with huge boats, power boats, unloading them. And when you look at them when they got in the water, the little kids had life vests, none of the adults. I just don't understand parents and families. What are they going to do if their child falls in? You're going to jump in with no life vest and maybe drown, which has happened recently to a celebrity woman, right? The 4-year-old had a life vest, she didn't, and she drowned. And it took several hours till the Coast Guard found this 4-year-old alone on the boat, whatever it was, and he said, "I saw mommy float away." Why would you risk that? I mean, I just don't understand. Anyway, I'm so grateful that I live in Oregon, that I live in Lane County during this pandemic, that we can go out and enjoy God's creation and get away. It's just such a revival for my soul. I was able to spend 2 nights camping with dear friends from Corvallis. We met at the Metolius River, 2 different campsites. It was quiet, not many people around. There were trails to walk along the river, and that river is so beautiful, that aqua color. And there's a spot called Gushing Springs where literally there's millions of gallons of water gushing out of a rock into the stream. It's just amazing. And then there are a lot of people doing fly fishing and little creatures, little chipmunks and stuff. And the ponderosa pines, the red color, so beautiful in the sunlight. So I spent 3 days hiking along the river, just marveling at this wonderful river that comes out of the ground, out of springs, and then eventually flows into a lake and then into the Deschutes and then into the Columbia. Yes. So thankful to be able to get away occasionally.
Lizzie, could you talk about the event that you're going to this afternoon?
Oh, let's see. Look up the title of it. Yes, are you going?
I am not going to go. I have to help somebody else today.
It's going to be very hot.
Yes, it will.
Okay. So I'm on the email list of the local NAACP chapter in Eugene, and also I like them on Facebook, so I see their postings on Facebook. So this afternoon, starting at 4 o'clock, there's an event at Alton Baker Park, and a speaker, I can't remember his name, but he's going to speak about the origins of black nationalism. And from 4 to 5, I think there's music outdoors, and then 5 to 6 is a speaker, and then afterwards, I don't remember what. It's going to be like 97 degrees. So I'll take a hat and lots of water. But I thought it's important for me to educate myself and support the local NAACP. And a couple other small things. I'm on Instagram because my daughters both are on Instagram and they post a lot. And so I see things that they liked. There are 2 black residents of Eugene who both needed money to start a food business. One woman is a caterer, but she lost that job, and then a young man was, his business is called, oh man, I'm so bad at remembering, something about soul food. Anyway, they both have friends that set up GoFundMe for them, and so I'm able to contribute a little bit, and the man who has the soul food business, he has a chance to open a restaurant in the 5th Street Market because of the fundraiser and support. And I hope the woman also will be able to do that. So just in small ways, if I learn about black residents of Eugene, I am happy to try and support them. And I learn about all that from social media, which I got on because I want to see what my daughters are doing.
When Ruthie said NAACP, it reminded me also that there is a press conference on Monday to announce the partnership with the Wayne County Mutual Aid and NAACP to provide more funding to mostly black and indigenous people of color. So look out in the news or write if you want to, write a letter to the editor about it. But they're trying to raise like $10,000 or $100,000 to be given away, a lot like what we're doing here with LCMA.
Well, my kids have gone home. Abram and his partner Laura were actually here for 5 weeks, which has never happened, since they left home. So, and it was really good. And of course, when they left, I got a little down. But I just think that was the greatest blessing that I've had in a long, long time. So. And the other thing I was going to say was this past Tuesday would have been John's 79th birthday. And I had planned long ago to try to get a bunch of people to go to his favorite hike, which is Canyon Creek Meadows. And he used to, around the time of his birthday, just gather a bunch of friends and we'd go on this hike together. And so I wanted to go do that, and of course, because of COVID, I couldn't quite do that, but I got one friend my friend Patty, who we kind of decided we convene each other's cars, because we're both real careful kind of thing. So she and I went, and I brought some ashes, and I had this definite idea of where I wanted to scatter them. You know, it was in this meadow, this place that he loved so much, and then at this place we had this picture taken of us that it's like our favorite picture ever since. And the hike was beautiful, but we could not get to either of those places. They somehow had changed the trail, and there was just no way to get there, and we didn't feel like, you know, the meadows and such around were too fragile to just go off the trails. And I was disappointed to a point that, you know, doesn't actually make sense. But I did find some nice places and sprinkled and had a few tears and said happy birthday and stuff like that. So I really want to figure that out because I'd like to try again when COVID's done and I could get, you know, more people, and it'd be a nice thing anyway. Anyone else want to share?
Galen, what's your mom's name again? Alice. You keep telling me, I keep forgetting.
Keep staying the same.
Also, like to keep in prayer my aunt. Her cancer is getting worse. She just went through a big chemotherapy thing and ended up with the cancer worse than at the beginning. So her name is Paula. Spend some time in prayer and meditation for those in need. Let's remember Tace as he goes back to college. And Alice. And Paula. And mercy for those who are stuck out in the heat or stuck in homes where they can't get cooled down. We ask for comfort for the many families who are grieving this year. This year in the United States, there's been more than 200,000 more deaths than in a normal year. We remember the nations of Mozambique and South Sudan, where violence and battles are occurring on a regular basis. May the peace of God visit us all. Amen.
So, offering plate is down here if anyone wants to benediction together in the bulletin. Go in peace,
And may the holy God surprise you. Christ Jesus be your partner.